today we have seen Sid, as Professor Sid from ETH, and today also again for the first time, I'm really honored to introduce Professor Taras, that very well known in geophysical fluid dynamics and in numerical geodynamics modeling, which is really an honor to have him here for the first time. So please join me to welcome Professor Taras from ETH.
Thank you very much for inviting me here. And what I would like to present is exactly in line with what was being told, to try to see to applications of HPC AI and, what are new opportunities coming with that. And I would like to draw your attention to computational biogeodynamics. So I'm sure you have never heard this word, computational biogeodynamics or biogeodynamics itself, because for the first time it was loudly spoken only 7 years ago. When I first time heard this word biogeodynamics, I was really puzzled what that is. And then I realized that biogeodynamics is the new transdisciplinary field with infinite opportunities for high-impact research, HPC computing, AI applications, and lots of other things related to that, including large societal potential of this new science. So what is this field? How has it been defined? So it's a transdisciplinary field that focuses on understanding and quantifying how interior and surface evolution of Earth and Earth-like planets interact to modulate landscape, atmosphere, ocean, climate, and life. So essentially, this is science about everything that you can imagine in nature, which is also visualized here. All this relationship between atmosphere, climate, landscape evolution, biodiversity evolution, plants growing and migration, and so on. So it sounds like mission impossible, and I would say to anyone that it's not possible to do such type of science because it's too complex. And it's indeed very complex. In majority of cases, we do not have enough imagination to even, have a first grasp on this relationship. It sounds very scary when you look at all these interconnects, and then you think it's not probably possible. But because of recent developments, primarily of computational methods in all involved disciplines like geodynamics, geomorphology, so science about landscape evolution, climate science, atmosphere science, geobiology, and ecology, computational tools with high-performance application has been developed in all these fields, and now it's not a mission impossible to try to couple these tools, try to create hybrid modeling approaches, and try to apply these approaches to this very complex system. And, I have a first experience with, going along this way, which I would like to present to you. And in fact, you quickly find out that there are lots of low-hanging fruits on this pathway, and then you find more and more exciting applications, and then actually the field is keeping broadening and widening by also including societal sciences and so on. And this is what I will try to exemplify in my presentation. Again, as a signature, that field is extremely new. The first workshop with the name Biogeodynamics on it, Biogeodynamics and Habitability, has been held 2 years ago, or less than 2 years ago, at ETH at 2023, and collected people from biology, from geosciences, but also from astronomy. So next to me, Didier Queller is sitting, who is Nobel Prize holder in discovering of exoplanets. And interest from astrobiology and astronomy communities is also very clear, because if we would like to, sense habitable planets far away from the Earth, we have to understand how these habitable conditions are produced and maintained through the history of billions of years of evolution of such planets. And this is not possible to probe directly. This is not easy to model, but much more feasible than to try to create enough data, essentially, to do this statistically. And then, essentially, the entire biogeodynamical and habitability direction is heavily computation-dominated. In addition to that, recently we launched new initiative with so-called cost actions. So we created new cost action to try to develop on pan-European basis the network of people who are interested in developing this new transdisciplinary science, because it's not easy to make sure that people are interacting because they are from very different disciplines. And traditionally, these disciplines like biology and ecology, they were developing in isolation from earth science or from some other disciplines like landscape evolution and so on. And only recently, also because of the development of these modeling tools, people started to be interested in the results of each other. And we would like to facilitate this networking between all different fields. And essentially, to our own surprise, we met very enthusiastic reaction from the community, from the science community. Now this network, to which you can sign up freely, it contains already 120 researchers from more than 30 countries and around 60 to 90 different institutions. And people are keeping signing up, and especially I was surprised how many biologists they are interested in going along this direction. Because initial initiative was from earth sciences, but it was quickly picked up by other communities. So if you're interested, you can just copy this QR code or type on the internet cost action Eurobic, and then you will be informed what we are planning to do by organizing conferences, summer schools, online classes, and various also computational teaching events to try to cross-inform people from different fields on things that you can do with current HPC AI applications in this transdisciplinary field. So branches of biogeodynamics currently, they're quite well understood. One is biogeodynamics of nutrients, and this is where the word of biogeodynamics has been born, because people in geobiology dealing with nutrient cycles in the Earth's interior, they quickly realized that their simplified box models, they are inadequate or only partly adequate to represent complex cycles of elements within the Earth's interior. And then they started to speak about the need to collaborate with geodynamicists and people doing modeling of planetary interiors and surface to understand nutrient cycles. In fact, this is the word was spelled out by Aubrey Cerkley in 2018 that we need this biogeodynamics as a new field. And fortunately, I heard this word and I was extremely excited about it. Not sure for what reason, because if somebody would tell me that I would become interested in bio by doing 20 years of computational geodynamics, I would laugh in his face or her face, but it's like a virus. You get it and then you get infected and then you get excited about it. And very more recent field is biogeodynamics of the environment. So how environment and environmental changes related to landscape and climate evolution are affecting life evolution and life origin. So, and why is it more recent? For the reason that the initiative comes from ecological and biological community, and they recently started to build these biodiversity models on a global basis with large time steps and large time spans comparable to geological processes. And they realized that what they obtained as results from this biodiversity evolution is heavily dependent on how plates are moving, how landscape globally is evolving, how these habitats are changing. And then essentially it was a very logical step for them to become interested in geodynamics and geomorphology, who are essentially studying these changes and evolution on the appropriate time scales. So this similarity of time scales is a very important thing. So my naive understanding or impression from biology was, before I started with this field, that everything in biosphere is happening very quickly. It's not comparable to geological processes. And viruses are appearing and disappearing every day, and this is how it should be. and then we are really decoupled in terms of the time scales. But in reality, complex organisms and big changes in biological evolution, they're happening very slowly, once per many millions of years. And this is what makes biological evolution very comparable in terms of time scales to geological evolution or evolution of planetary interior. So they are much more intrinsically coupled than, for example, atmospheric evolution or climate evolution. Especially atmospheric circulation is on much faster time scales, which are not comparable to biological or geodynamical evolution. But of course, atmospheric and climate evolution is forcing some feedbacks which are affecting both biosphere and also interior of the Earth and other Earth-like planets for the reason of these couplings through, ocean circulation, through atmospheric circulation, through precipitation, feedback to erosion, landscape changes, and then by changing landscape, we are also changing biological habitats, which is driving and shaping evolution of biological species. So this is the proof that, in fact, biologists, they independently came to the idea that there is a congruence in between plate tectonics and biodiversity evolution. By exploring these mechanistic biodiversity models, they found out that especially on land, in dry land condition or in fresh water, environment, you see very big correlation with highest biodiversity related to regions with most complex geological or tectonic history. So the more you change on the surface by, creating mountains and destroying mountains, creating ocean straits, and creating changes in the landscape and local climate, the bigger biodiversity you obtain there. And essentially, it's an integral picture of acceleration of complex life evolution by shaping Earth's interior and surface. So they were speaking in 2018, Loic Pellissier, who is one of our most active collaborators and my co-authors on many of the papers that I will present to you. He was speaking this out back in 2018, and if I discuss with Loic and ask him what is his kind of biggest scientific interest, he's saying biogeodynamics and geodynamics. He would like to learn about Earth's interior and surface evolution, better to understand essentially his biodiversity patterns that he discovers on the basis of field studies and high performance computing. So here's one example, also co-authored by Loic, how they studied biodiversity in Madagascar and tried to understand how this biodiversity within the Madagascar developed in response to the so-called erosional patterns evolution. So you are just lifting up big island, and then it starts to erode under precipitation. Water is flowing down, it's eroding material, bringing this material into ocean, and by this it also shapes different habitats on the characteristic time scales of millions of years. You don't have to learn details from here, but you see that these spikes or variations, they are happening on the time scales of millions of years. And this is what is actually forcing species to change and to adapt. Because if the habitat is changing or actually is destroyed or fragmented, then different species can develop. They can either interact at a later stage if habitats are merged together, or they can actually go in a complete isolation, and then after a very long time, they are not able to interact with each other and create new species. They start competing and so on. So these things are actually shaped by erosional processes, by landscape evolution, which is in turn shaped by these uplift rates or evolution of the Earth's interior. And this was published last year in Science, and it's one of the examples when even relatively kind of simple merging between different disciplines like geomorphology about landscape and biology about species evolution and habitats evolution, it brings, very fruitful results which are of very high impact and very high significance. So what is also very important to understand is by default, biogeodynamics is heavily computationally dominated for two reasons. One reason is it's very difficult to try to decipher complex relationships simply based on statistics, because they are actually based on complex physics, biology, chemistry, and atmospheric processes. And second point is that we are in an extremely data-starved mode. So what we have is, for example, for the evolution of the Earth, for geodynamics itself, you see this 2D diagram. If you would like to study evolution of the Earth's interior through time, you have to know data within the Earth's interior for any moment of time in the past. And this is not the case because we have data on the surface, which is shown here by green. We have also data for the interior thanks to geophysical observation, which are shown in blue here, but also for the present moment of time. And only historical record is present on the Earth's surface, which is shown in red here. And the trouble is not only that these rocks are found on the Earth's surface. Majority of these rocks are also created very near the surface. The deepest rock that we find on the surface, they have been created or fully reset at depths less than 300 kilometers, so the entire range of other depths are completely not covered. So it implies that geodynamics in particular and biogeodynamics in general cannot be data-based science exclusively, for the simple reason we don't have this data. We have to rely on our imagination and intuition, which is also deficient, but better we can rely on physical laws, and through modeling we can propagate our knowledge back in time to essentially cover this range of necessary relationship. Because alternative would be to invent time machine and to travel back and shoot seismics or drill very deep into the Earth's interior, which is not physically possible or technically possible and will not be possible most likely in the near future. So if we try to characterize this, an ideal HPC tool for modeling biogeodynamics, it's presented here. So we need something to model planetary interior evolution. And we are good through 5 decades of this geodynamical model development. We often call it heroic modeling development effort because we were not strongly supported by mathematicians or physicians because our problems that we are trying to solve, they are very dissimilar, say, to atmospheric circulations. We are dealing with so-called steady state Navier-Stokes, which is Stokes equation. And in contrast to atmospheric or ocean science, viscosity of our materials is enormous. So viscosity of water is 10 to minus 3. Viscosity of rocks is at lowest 10 to plus 17. And these variations in viscosity are within at least 6 orders of magnitude. So what we have are equations which are very difficult to solve, and matrices are looking very poorly conditioned. And Marcel Ferrari will speak about it after me and present his experience of dealing with these sort of problems computationally. But nevertheless, community was bold enough to develop initially individual tools, and currently we are also developing community tools to model all these interior processes on the time scales of many millions to billions of years, and understanding feedbacks to surface evolution. So our interior circulation produces ups and downs on the surface, which are followed by erosion due to different precipitation patterns, and then we create these nice surface patterns, river patterns, depressions, mountains, which are evolving and are potentially, of course, related also to habitats evolution or to climates. If you created big mountain ranges, of course, your atmospheric and ocean circulations are changing, and as a result, there is global feedback to the climate, which needs to be understood. So in addition to that, here is biodiversity modeling. It's already quite an advanced field, started relatively recently. They're using sort of cellular automats type of modeling, mechanistic ones, how species are evolving, how they are created and how they are destroyed, so essentially extinction and speciation processes are modeled. And this is possible to do in a variable landscape environment, variable geographical environment. There are lots of need for computational tools development there. I'm sure that you are aware about climate models where typically for atmospheric and ocean circulations, people are using Navier-Stokes equation in a classical form, low viscosity, but also lots of other realms for approximation on various processes such as CO2 consumption or release and so on. So somewhere also here, carbon cycle models globally, which are heavily contributing to climate and interior and surface evolution. And in ideal case, all these different tools, they need to be fully coupled. But since the field is very young, of course, we are not having yet examples where all these computational tools with their own problems and pitfalls are fully computationally coupled, but we have a couple of successful examples where we have partial coupling of these tools. For example, this is PhD of Dominik Stemmler, who was my first PhD student in biogeodynamics, and he was also infected by me to try to penetrate into this field, and he was heavily excited about it and then brought this first computational framework. So what we do, we take so-called paleogeographical reconstructions, which are contributing to landscape development. So we don't do modeling of geodynamics itself. Instead, we use database science reconstruction of the surface evolution, and we couple it to the climate evolution, which is dependent on landscape evolution, and to biodiversity evolution. So the workflow of this computational partly coupled tool looks like the following. So this is our digital elevation model that has been produced by Scottis and Wright in 2018, and it evolves through time, this paleogeographical configuration, both in oceanic domain and in continental domain. So elevation is changing, climate, local climate is presumably also changing. These things are digitized on the time scales of many hundreds of millions of years, and then we can model climate based on that. So what we use for climate modeling is so-called intermediate complexity climate models, which you can compute relatively fast, but they are very coarse and have simplified physics. We use form code for this, which is especially created to make this paleoclimatic calculations. So you can do them in a reasonable amount of time. So it's of course much less complex. The typical general circulation models like GCM, which are used for modern climate, but advantage is you can run it for many thousands of years relatively quickly. You cannot, of course, run it still for millions of years, but you can do some sort of lookup table at different conditions and actually model evolution through geological time, retrieving from there temperature, local and average precipitation, aridity, and some other climatic constants, which are very useful for modeling landscape evolution. For modeling landscape evolution, we first have to essentially refine our climate model, because landscape evolution happens on much finer spatial scales. So here is a representation of the form output, but what we need would be refined results so that we can model river patterns, we can model erosion, sedimentation, and other processes. So what do we do there? We use this refining tool, which is called CHELSA. It's a physics-informed climate refinement tool, and what it does produce is very similar to what is really observed. So from very coarse picture like this, you can create very well-refined model for the local climate. And it's computationally very efficient, so it's much more efficient than to run climate simulation at this very fine scale. And then it's also comparable with direct climate simulation. Then this local climate data are informing landscape evolution model. We use GoSPL. There are other tools. So GoSPL developed in Australia, especially. It's a global landscape evolution tool, which is informed by climate, local precipitation, aridity, patterns to produce, and rock properties to produce erosional patterns and to produce refined landscape evolution in terms of both, uplift rates, rising of these mountains or erosion of these mountains, transportation of sediments, nutrient transportation essentially. So it's an ideal tool to couple to the biological domain. And then for biology, we use so-called genesis that has been created at ETH in the group of Loic Pellissier. So paper here, Hagen et al. 2021. It's a general mechanistic tool with lots of flexibility. You can model very general species, but you can also model exact species with very detailed biological characteristics, which gives you an opportunity to investigate both global and local biodiversity evolution scenario on a reasonable timescales. And then you can produce these biodiversity patterns and phylogenetic trees, which can potentially be also compared to paleontological data. So if you predict that within certain interval of time, locally, there is certain evolution, and you predict this evolution, for example, for plants, then you can go back to data, paleontological data, and compare your predictions to data. So essentially, what I've presented to you implies that computational tools, they have been developed in each realm that is currently involved into biogeodynamics. So, and then you can ask questions, for example, how different will be biodiversity evolution if we consider, like here in the bottom, or not consider, like here in the top, motion of plates within, say, a period of time of last 100 million years. So how big is the influence of plate tectonics on the evolution of species on land or in water, which is much more interconnected environment, or in fresh water, so due to the river pattern development. And you can ask yourself, this congruence of plate tectonics and biodiversity, is it a real fact? Is it supported by data? Or, can it be explained based on some simple principles? And then you can try to model different scenarios and try to understand, influence of each individual parameter. Of course, this is, very big amount of work that is needed for exploring these tools, but it's also a huge amount of opportunities to address scientific questions that were previously not possible to tackle at all, simply because our human intuition is really limited in terms of coupling all these difficult processes, and also our educational background is not good enough. We have to team up both in terms of computational tools, but also in terms of people expertise. This is why the cross-disciplinarity and networking is extremely important. So here's another examples, biogeodynamical carbon cycle modeling. So it was done by, Julia and Roger recently, our first PhD student who defended in biogeodynamics. So we are now kind of stamped to be producing biogeodynamics. And what he did is the following. He tried to investigate how big is the role of plants globally distributed for the carbon cycle. So for producing and recycling of CO2 into the Earth's interior, which is known to affect heavily the climate. So currently humans are producing lots of CO2, climate is affected, and we would like to know what should we do about it and if we can do anything. But even on longer geological timescales, this also happens, and plants are actively participating in this process of CO2 recycling, not only by, trapping CO2 from the atmosphere and making, carbon in the plant's body, but also by enhancing erosion, and mainly by enhancing weathering and erosion by biological species that are released into the soil and actually chemically reacting with the soil. And this effect is extremely huge. It has not been realized until relatively recently that we have to account for global distribution of plants to properly understand global carbon cycle. And this was essentially one of the first achievements of Julian. He found out that you can much better explain global evolution of the carbon cycle if you take into account that in the past, say, 500 million years, plants emerged, changed, and actually redistributed globally and adapted and evolved in response to the climate evolution. So essentially, these specially explicit plants and their distribution on the Earth's surface is a key component of the carbon cycle. You cannot apply zero-D models because zero-D models will not work. So plants should be able to migrate in geographical space, and by that they should actually ameliorate climate and have a feedback to the climate. And of course, feedback to the climate happens on time scales of plants migration and adaptation, and those rates of plants migration and adaptation, so-called plants dispersal, they are known from paleontological records and from present-day estimates. And in fact, it seemed that, for example, if we have a process of sudden degassing, like in the past we had several mass extinction episodes on Earth caused by extreme volcanism related to so-called large igneous provinces. So you release in a very short, geologically short period of time, some say tens to hundreds of years, hundreds of thousands of years, huge amount of CO2. It's actually slower than what we do now with industrial evolution, but it's comparable. So it's a fast process from geological point of view. You are releasing this amount of CO2, of course, then there is a reaction, is warming, and then there are several possibilities what you receive after that. So the first possibility is a dead world. So if release is so huge and plants are not fast enough to disperse from unfortunate climatic area, what will happen is full deforestation, extinction of plants, and then you stabilize your climate by at very high temperature of the atmosphere by enhancing weathering due to this hotter temperature and huge precipitation. So you create dead world without plants, stabilize at temperature which can be 25 to 30 degrees higher than initial steady state. This is, of course, very unfortunate scenario. Hopefully, we would like to avoid it. So then another possibility is after some millions of years of successful plants migration, but not so fast, you create new configuration of plants, which is shown bottom right. And then this, top right, you see it here. So more deserts are created in contrast to the initial steady state. And then essentially plants are migrating toward polar regions. And then your climate is warmer, but it's really somewhat warmer, say 5 degrees warmer. You can live there. So, but plants migrate. An important point is this relaxation toward the new steady state is much, much slower than the initial warming due to this very fast degassing. So behavior of the system is highly asymmetrical. This is what should be really understood. So in the most fortunate case, if plants are super efficient and they are migrating and here, outward and inward relatively successfully, then you can actually come to the same world, but still you need several millions of years. So what this exercise is showing that behavior of the climate system mediated by plants is highly asymmetrical, and this is to expect. So therefore, we should really think carefully about our societal plans for mitigating CO2 release and so on. There is no guarantee that when we essentially decrease quickly amount of CO2 in the atmosphere by technological CO2 consumption, our climate will return to the original state of global temperatures, because they are not directly coupled, these things. So, and moreover, different physics are involved for warming and relaxation of climate. In addition, at the same CO2 content in the atmosphere, we have several steady state, cold steady state, warm steady state, and very hot steady state. So then, essentially, if you cannot change global temperature, and global temperature, despite of your CO2 consumption, will stay more or less constant, then actually you will departure from cold steady state toward lower CO2 contents. Essentially, you will go toward warm steady state. if you do it relatively fast. So these things are needed to be understood, and it's a relatively recent result about these climate attractors. And we should really probably think on a much longer term about our climate policy. So, of course, it sounds like a good goal, net zero CO2 to 2030, but what if, you know, the system will feed back in this manner, in a much slower manner, and we have to have climate policy for millions of years rather than only for a very short period of times. Like we have, for example, radioactive waste disposition policy. So in this case, it seems that we do need to work out much more smart environmental policy and much longer term. In addition, what we see, reaction of the system to different paleogeographical configuration is also very different. So there are some fortunate configurations where you have relatively little changes like this one, but for some magic reasons, you change it a little bit, for example, into this configuration, and then, you know, the spread of changes is much, much bigger. We are living somewhere in an intermediate case, so not most fortunate, not most conservative. We can expect quite a big changes due to, you know, these technological processes. So what we see now also a relationship of this calculation to data. They are quite comparable to paleogeographical and paleontological and geochemical proxies in terms of CO2 content evolution and climate evolution. So it seems that essentially data are supporting this long-term feedback with plants. And then if we look, you know, if we release lots of CO2 at present day, this is what we should be expecting. So first of all, after end of CO2 release, climate will still be going up. Essentially, temperature will still be rising, and then relaxation of this temperature will be happening relatively slowly. So in the last 5 minutes, I will just try to present you something that is that has exoplanetary perspective, and it's also part of biogeodynamics. So we can think about, you know, what would be biogeodynamical implications for finding extraterrestrial civilizations, or better to say, missing extraterrestrial civilizations, because so far there is no confirmed fact that we were contacted by anyone. In fact, it was very popular question, you know, technological civilizations on exoplanets in 70s or 80s, but then interest to this field has been decaying constantly, and currently it's not anymore in fashion. It's almost like a toxic subject. For example, we see in the list of questions asked for exoplanetary discovery, this question where and how to search for intelligent life is not even asked anymore. And we do think it's a mistake. We have to think about it because, you know, there is a simple fact that we are not contacted by anyone. And the trouble is not that we are not contacted by anyone, but that previous calculation, they were showing that intelligent life should be quite common in the universe, and we should be contacted by other people. So then I give you a spoiler right away. We are not contacted. Why is that, and what should we do? So why is that? Is because civilization and intelligent life are only possible on planets with continents, means dry land, oceans, and plate tectonics. And then essentially such planets, they're extremely rare among the population of planets that can be expected in our galaxy. And this is the reason why we don't see anyone, because there are no anyone to contact with us. So what should we do about it? We should, instead of waiting of being contacted, which is very unlikely, we should just simply try to find such planets with potential for hosting advanced life and intelligent life, either for ourselves, use in the very far future, or, you know, for trying to access them somehow. And then this COPT planet, continents, ocean plate tectonics, they can be found remotely by using the likely distinct atmospheric and climate signature. So to speak about contacts, so here we are in the red box within this time span of the development of our galaxy and our specific stellar system. Of course, other stars, they are developing and starting to develop at different moments of time. So no development is done in parallel. So, and being contacted by other civilization implies that essentially they're at the same stage of development. And if they send the signal, this signal overlap with our longevity region. So, because we can get extinct also in some period of time. So, there were probably civilizations that were in our galaxy, but they were too early to contact us. There will be probably civilization in our galaxy, but they will be too late to contact us. So, essentially, overlapping between our and other civilization is a rare event. And this has been taken into account by Drake in his famous Drake equation. So here in blue, you have our planetary basis. So planets potentially habitable. And then essentially this basis contains this L value. So the longer is L value, this longevity value of civilization, essentially is the better for us. So the bigger is overlap regions. And then we have three probability. If planet is suitable for life, how big is the probability to obtain life on this planet? It has been suggested it's 1. So if there is a possibility to have life, it will be originated on the planet sooner or later. So second probability is, if there is primitive life on the planet, how big is the opportunity to develop intelligent life? And it also has been assumed to be 1, for the reason that, any life sooner or later can develop into the complex and intelligent life. And then in the end, if there is an intelligent life, how big is the opportunity for this life to become communicative? And then opportunity is less than 1, because not all civilization on Earth will communicative. Romans, for example, or Maya, they were not at the technological basis to communicate. And then what we see, that in our galaxy, with all these calculations, there should be between 1,000 and 100 million civilizations ready to contact us. And this is astonishing, because we are not contacted by anyone. And then there was this Fermi paradox spelled out in 70s. Where is everybody? If these calculations are correct, so are aliens hiding from us? And what we do believe, they are not hiding. It's simply that estimation of the 2 factors, at least within these equations, are too optimistic. So first of all, probability of having intelligent, complex life on a planet with any life is much, 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 much less than 1. And second is that, this lifespan of civilizations is not so long as been estimated, because there are biological limitations and societal limitations. So essentially about the evolution itself, what we should understand, you cannot create microbe and then in one step create human out of a microbe. You need some hundreds of evolutionary steps to have these humans instead of microbes. So, and the trouble is that evolutionary steps, they are very slow. If you look these steps, the distance in between different steps are millions, if not tens of millions of years. So you need 1,000 steps. Each step is 1 million years, which is very, optimistic estimate. Then you need 1 billion years. And if you slow down this evolution by factor of 10, which is very easy by unfortunate environmental developments, then you are nowhere, because planets are not living for tens of billions of years. They just get destroyed by supernova development. So, and this is estimates for, the speed of the evolution. Essentially, how many steps per million years. And then you see the typical value is 0.3 steps. So you need 3 millions of years for significant evolutionary step of complex organisms. Viruses are probably evolving very quickly, but complex species, they're extremely slow in their evolution. And this is, this is 1,000 step stair problem. So then different environments on planets like Venus or Earth, they are affecting evolution differently. And there are good reasons for these effects. For example, in case of plate tectonics, we have increased nutrient supply, increased free oxygen in the atmosphere, climate amelioration, accelerated habitat formation, and moderate sustained environmental pressure, so that species, they have essentially very favorable condition for evolving and changing toward intelligent species and surviving essentially. If you change to Venus environment, even with Earth-like climate, because of the very slow changes intercalated with these large extinction events, what you will obtain is very slow evolution and then no development of intelligent life and civilizations. And modern plate tectonics is relatively recent on Earth, only last billion years, which also overlapped with accelerated evolution on Earth. So then what we are saying is there are probably outward in our galaxy plenty of planets like Venus, where we can expect, primitive life. But there are only few like Earth where complex and intelligent life can develop or has sufficient time and vigor to develop. And then we can compute potentially what is the probability to find plate tectonics on these Earth-like planets. First of all, planets should be big enough, so bigger than Mars for sure, where we cannot have plate tectonics, so 50% of planets, they fall out. And then second, it should have an appropriate composition, and then 1/3 of 50 is also falling out. So 2/3 of 50 are also falling out. So you need appropriate stellar composition, which makes planetary composition sufficiently heavy, and then we can have this plate tectonics operating. So then only 17% of planets, they can have plate tectonics. In addition to that, we are also saying that we need coexistence of dry land and oceans to sustain life evolution on early stage in oceans and development of civilization on dry land for the later stage. And this is an extremely strict condition, having both continents and oceans coexisting. Why? Because topography evolution is very subtle, only a few kilometers. This is not dependent on planetary size, it's just isostasy, which is independent of gravity. And then if you put too much water, which is very easy, you flood all continents. If you put too little water, then you cannot drive plate tectonics. And this is the range of variations which is permitted for the amount of water on a planet. And if you compare this to the range of possible variation in the water content, then you find out that probability of hitting this window of right water content is extremely small. So probability is 10 to minus 4 to 10 to minus 2 at best. And then you start multiplying these two numbers, which are both relatively small. So 17% times to 10 to minus 4, 10 to minus 2, and this is where we are. Number of planets among all terrestrial, potentially habitable planets that will have conditions appropriate for civilization development is much, much less than 1%. So then it's not surprising why we are not contacted by anyone. In addition, lifespan of civilizations might be heavily overestimated, because recently what has been found is typical timescales of societal collapse due to the disruption between population growth and resources availability are hundreds of years. So if we can overcome this with some, potential improvements in our societal policy, also overcoming this potential incompatibility of our intrinsic biologically related behavior patterns, then hopefully we can come to the survival of species timescale. But that one is also not great, some millions of years. So if we combine all these calculations that we have done here, so what we found out is that essentially, number of planets to expect in our galaxy is in between 10 to minus 4 to 10 to plus 4. So essentially, middle point is 1 civilization per galaxy at the present, ready to contact with us. In the worst case, it's 4 civilizations per 10,000 galaxies. And then actually, it's very clear that we will be in a big trouble, in finding anyone to talk to. So what we can do remote sensing, because for remote sensing, it's lifespan of evolution and plate tectonics, and then we are in much better position. So here I would like to conclude that, new field for HPC computing is there with big scientific, computational, and societal potential. And then actually, very important message is we have to think about longevity of our unique human technological civilization. We are likely responsible for our galaxy. We are only one who is in this galaxy. And then actually, our plans should span to at least some millions of years for survival in this technological, state to be able to cross with anyone in the some distant future. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Taras. So we have time for just one question. You said you wanted it? Okay.
So it's a great talk. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. So there were a lot of data and pre-computed data. And really that will help. I mean, that's for the simulation, spinning up the simulations. The question is like, instead of computing data, won't be possible to use AI modeling in this case? And is there any collaboration with the AI community to predict instead of expensive computation?
Absolutely, yes. This is one of the hottest topics we are discussing within the community, using AI for either substituting heavy computations, like with GCM, and or to producing data on the basis of disrupted pattern. There is huge, enormous potential for applying AI within this, very complex hybrid computational framework. Of course, I cannot identify each and every opportunity for AI application because the field is too immature, but I'm sure that people with AI background come into this field. They will have lots of opportunities. Thank you.
Hopefully we'll see something maybe next year.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Taras.